I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Lana Wilson, the director of Pretty Baby, Brooke Shields, which is a two-part documentary about Miss Shields. And this film, Lana, really, really kind of struck me in a lot of different ways because it is about so much more than just Brooke Shields' life. It's about mothers and daughters. It's about, what the cost of fame. It's about the way women are sometimes viewed and objectified in a way that it's about motherhood. And so as you're putting this film together, are you seeing these threads come together, or how did these threads come together for you?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that it struck you and that all of those themes were resonating with you. And yeah, exactly. It was just that, I didn't want to do simply Brooke Shields' life story. She's already written the book. There are lots of other ways to learn about Brooke Shields. Like, I really wanted to do something that was Brooke's personal story, but in a way we haven't heard it, but that is also looking at Brooke as a vessel for much bigger conversations. And I think a part of that is baked into her personal story in a way, and that one of the big struggles of her life was understanding who she was because she was a symbol before she was a human being, in a way. So there's the story of Brooke personally, and then there's the story of Brooke Shields, the symbol. And any symbol is something that has moral value. And Brooke Shields meant different things at different times in American culture. And what I was interested in was, how did what people said about who Brooke Shields was and what they were focused on with her at different times kind of hold a mirror up to what our culture thought about girls and women at different points in time. And, the stuff about the mother-daughter relationship and motherhood, all of that too, it's like, I'm really interested in what's universal and relatable about Brooke's story. And part of that is individuating from your parent, becoming a parent yourself, everything that's caught up in that. In some ways, I feel like her life was an extreme, public, highly scrutinized version of a life journey that many people go on. It's just all hyperbolic and almost through a magnifying glass because it's Brooke Shields.
And one of the things I watched this with my mother, and one
Oh,
of the
really?
things that was really fascinating was to hear her say, "Oh my God, imagine if Brooke Shields was growing up in the time of social media, where
Yeah.
objectification hits a whole new level." And
Yep.
I found that so fascinating. Did you see like some really contemporary resonance with Brooke's story? Things that, oh my God, it's almost like a cautionary tale.
Definitely. I mean, what most struck me when I first, she handed me this hard drive of material that her mom, Terry, had collected over 50 years. After every talk show was taped, her mom would go over and be like, I need a copy of this now, and would not leave the studio until she got it. So I had this extraordinary trove of material. And one of the things that first struck me when I watched, for example, 12-year-old Brooke being interviewed on the press tour for Pretty Baby, was none of this has changed at all. Girls are still told, on the one hand, it's wonderful if you're beautiful in this extremely narrow definition of what beauty is, and sensuality is good, and your sexuality is the greatest power that you have if you grow up as a girl. On the other hand, if you go too far, if you're too sexual, if you dress in a way that's deemed not appropriate, which is very confusing because you're told you're supposed to be sexual, but you can't be too sexual. It's like an invisible line. If that happens, then you're punished and condemned and criticized. And that's what I saw happening with 12-year-old Brooke. And I immediately thought, this is still what's going on now for teenage girls, but also for a lot of other people. And what you're saying about objectification in general, absolutely. Nothing's really changed or improved. I mean, on the one hand, I would say that social media does give the opportunity for people to create their image, sure, and for people to do unconventional things. And we have gotten small glimpses of the chance to show different types of bodies and sexualities and gender identities, for instance, on social media. That's great. However, the reality is that almost everyone, and especially women, are typically imitating the images they see around them. And who are those images created by? Well, they're created by mostly, giant corporations that are making ads, also by TV and movie creators. And typically, all of us are simply recreating those images. And those images of women continue to be highly sexualized and continue to really only celebrate women for primarily being beautiful or sexually desirable to men. And so it's really complicated because now, we all objectify ourselves and each other, and especially girls do this. And that's what's happening all the time still. And it is extra scary with social media. I mean, we've seen from the congressional hearings what the impact is on girls' self-esteem, depression levels, suicide risk when you're not only engaged in this all the time, but you're also comparing yourself not just to beauty icons like Brooke Shields or supermodels even, but you're comparing yourself to your classmates who through filters, and I don't even know it because I barely know how to use Instagram myself, but these are not real images. They're all fake, but they're not even supermodels. They're your classmates at school.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I'm a high school teacher in my normal
Oh,
career.
really?
And
Yeah.
so I see this, and at the same time, I think one of the most fascinating segments of the film is Brooke talking to her own daughters
Mm.
and the awareness of, oh, you were this age doing this film, and that would not be allowed today. And yet there is still that dichotomy of, yeah, we look back at that era and go, no, that's not okay. But
Right.
then there's still that kind of drive with young girls I see in my own class who are still kind of driven to put forth this image of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
to put it out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, how can you not? Like I would say I'm a pretty cowardly, conventional person personally in a lot of ways. And but I understand the kind of we're all just trying to feel good about ourselves in the framework we've been given. My hats go off to the people who don't care about that stuff and can, project whatever image they want of themselves out into the world. Like that's amazing to me. But for the most part, we're just trying to feel okay about ourselves. And part of that is fitting in, and part of that is looking like all the powerful images that we see around us that are created by adults. And so, yeah, I would say it hasn't really changed at all. Although, on the other hand, I don't think that, there would be a film where an 11-year-old has to kiss a 30-year-old. But, think about Interview with the Vampire. That is more recent, still a while ago now, but that was, I think, a 9-year-old kissing what Brad Pitt was 30. I don't know how that felt for Kirsten Dunst at the time or how it feels now, but I think that a lot of stuff like that is still happening. So maybe there have been slight changes, but there's not been a radical shift in how we see women and girls.
It is such a difficult thing to go back through one's own past and one's own history, particularly when it's painful. So I'm curious as to how you developed this kind of relationship with Brooke that made her feel comfortable
Mhm.
opening up like that.
Well, it's really just it's kind of two things at once. First, it's just from the first meeting in person. I feel like a big part of it whenever I meet a subject, they instantly either trust me or they don't. It's kind of just like an immediate reaction and kind of how you get along in chemistry and the feeling you just have when someone walks into a room, the way we all are, I think, with anyone we meet for the first time. So that is a part of it. And Brooke was just open and game, and she's a really fearless person. So she was right from the beginning, she was game. She'd watched all of my other films, and I think she saw that they were sensitive and complex, but also that I'm not making puff pieces. I'm not here to make kind of celebrity hagiography. And she didn't want that. She was willing to let me have creative control, final cut, genuinely because she thought that's what would make the best movie. So she'd seen my films. It was the first meeting, which was wonderful. But then it is also, getting to know someone over time. I interviewed Brooke over several days. And, I'll say too that she doesn't look back at her life and think so far and think that, oh, this was very painful. Sure, there were very painful moments, but I think she looks back on most of her experiences with a lot of joy and happiness. Things could be simultaneously wonderful and difficult at the same time, or maybe, things could be great on the film set, but then hard at home with her mother at the same time, for instance. So I think she loves, remembering all of this stuff. It is uncomfortable some moments for sure. And, I think that's just about, especially when you're interviewing someone, being patient. I'm a pretty quiet interviewer. I really want to let the subject talk because, especially with someone like Brooke, I often notice this and tried to include this in the film. She's so smart and so introspective that sometimes if you just let people talk, they realize things as they're talking. And I loved getting inside Brooke's thought process. One of the most difficult moments for her to talk about was her remembering being sexually assaulted in her 20s. And I feel like what's so powerful about that sequence in the film is that you hear Brooke's thought process and how she's grappled with her own feelings of guilt and of shame and of complicity around that. And I think that's incredibly powerful because it's rare that we get the chance to hear someone who was assaulted and is openly saying, yeah, I blame myself. I still sort of blame myself. I'm still wrestling with it. And you get to kind of really see that in the present tense because it's it can be a lifelong process for so many people. And I thought that was a real gift that Brooke was able to be that open and to kind of think out loud in front of the camera in a way.
I had read that you became a mother in the midst of this,
Yeah.
in the midst of making this film. I'm curious, this film, it has so much to say about the complex relationships between parents and children. I mean, this obviously, Brooke's
Yeah.
mother, an extreme example. But I'm curious, did making the film kind of influence the way that you look at your own children, about your own choices that you make?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, this was like a 101 crash course in parenting for me in a way. Um, yeah, like you say, there's so many connections to this, I think, for a lot of people. For me personally, my mom's mom was severely alcoholic, and I became a mother to a daughter while making this movie. And I think part of it was, I was quite pregnant when I did the main interview with Brooke, and we started talking about postpartum depression. And I remember her looking at me and being like, "Are you sure you want to hear this in your present condition?" And I was like, "Actually, desperately, yes," because it is so hard to understand what's going to happen to you when you're pregnant or when you become a mother or a parent. I think especially for women because it's really romanticized and simplified, and it's hard to get kind of candid.
It's still
Still.
simplified.
Yeah. So, I think I read Brooke's postpartum book before I was pregnant. I found it just stunning. But then talking to her about it and getting her to talk about it in the documentary, I was just like, this is such a gift to be able to hear this. And in the context of Brooke's life, it was just extra brave to talk about it in that way. I think because of her public relationship with her mother, as Judd Nelson says in the film, people freaked out because it's like, oh, she's saying she's a bad mom, echoes of the past. It's like her own mother. It was really fraught territory, and that she had the courage to do that because she thought, I felt alone. I didn't think I could be helped. Maybe if I say something, it will help other people. I thought was amazing. And it was helpful for me in that way too, to just know what could happen when I became a mother was really comforting. And I just felt so grateful for that. But then beyond that, uh, Brooke as a parent is just incredible to see. And I think you see it even in that last scene in the film. She really is willing to listen to her kids. Ever since she was a kid herself and went to Princeton, defying all of the odds and expectations to do that, she's always been really committed to learning and growing as a person in all ways. And I think you see that with her daughters at the end. She isn't defensive. She isn't like, well, I was right, or my mom was right, or whatever, but she also holds on to her point of view and doesn't give it up, doesn't just say, okay, whatever you say. Like, I thought that whole dynamic of the family at the dinner table, this environment where people could speak freely and say their points of view and disagree with each other, but in a loving way. I mean, how rare is that in a family? And I thought if I could create an environment like that for my family, like that is the biggest accomplishment of all. And in fact, when I think about Brooke, I think in a way, one of her biggest accomplishments is just that, in her relationship with her mom, Brooke wasn't going to say her opinion or contradict her mother. That was not the dynamic at all. But she now has created a place where her kids can feel completely safe to do that.
And I also loved, just from a, I mean, my children are grown now, so I have been through this, but I can't tell you how gratifying it was to see that Brooke Shields has her daughters doing the dishes. I don't know if you intended to leave that in on purpose, but I grabbed onto that and was so happy.
Brooke told me that there was only one thing that seemed fake to her in this entire documentary, and that was the moment she was like, I don't think they would have done the dishes so enthusiastically if you hadn't been there filming. So yeah.
I'm just curious, where do you think her strength comes from? Because at the end of this documentary, I remember thinking to myself and talking with my own parents about it. I was like, God, to go through all that at such a young age and come out of it so strong and so smart and so fiercely loving of her children, and really it seems like of herself. Where do you think that strength comes from?
Yeah. I personally think a part of it was growing up as the child of an alcoholic. I think that she had to be strong. She had to be really mature from a young age. She felt from, childhood onward, the responsibility to keep her mother alive, both to support them financially by being successful at work from a young age, but also, just the literal caretaker responsibility of keeping her mother alive. I mean, she was writing her own schedules every day, Brooke. She knew what time they needed to leave to get into the airport, to go to the commercial catalog shoot job. Like, she was the person staying on top of all of those logistics always. So I think part of the strength actually comes from that experience. But I also think part of it was just something innate that she was born with. You see, I mean, I've seen all of the footage of her from a little baby until now. And there's just something about her. She was really determined from a young age, really smart, really determined, really strong, not afraid of anything. And that's always been there.
I'm just curious, to finish up. I just wanted to ask, I mean, what draws you to certain subjects? What drives that desire to investigate the next subject?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is usually with verite films, I would say that I want to be in a room to see something happen. Most of my films have been verite. This is the first predominantly archival film I've made. So usually it's, I want to be in the room. I want to be a fly on the wall for this thing that's going to happen in front of my eyes. And often it's an intense, emotional, deep, rich encounter between two people, for example. In this case, it's like looking for something that's really rich and layered and surprising and revelatory. Does this person and her story, and then the bigger story around her, is that something that I can really dive into for years and continually be surprised by it and changed by it myself? Does it have that quality of like an onion where you're peeling back the layers? That's what's really signaling to me, oh, this could be a film. And the last thing is just, is this inherently cinematic, and how so? And I think in the case of this project, I felt like all the richness and the depth were there in Brooke and in her story, and all of the gateways in, so that people would be surprised to see themselves in her, and then this much bigger cultural story. But I think the cinematic part was the archival material and how jaw-dropping it was, and the idea that I could use some of that stuff to create what felt like scenes, even if they're taking place in the past, and to kind of also have this. I was excited with this particular project about this lyrical sweep through decades that we could accomplish in the film. I loved that her relationship with her mom, for instance, although her mom's not here, was so well documented because they made all of these public appearances together, and you can see so much of the relationship and how it changed on their faces over the years. And so, getting to put together things like one of the final sequences of the film is Brooke remembering her mother's death and talking about how, on the one hand, she always thought when her mom died, she would die. That was the fear instilled in her from when she was a little kid. On the other hand, she realized that only when her mom died could she actually be free. And so getting to, cinematically create that and juxtapose those two ideas that seem incompatible but can both be true at once and that I think is kind of resonant for so many people in their relationships with their parents. That's the kind of opportunity where I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get to do this.
Well, Lana, congratulations. It's such a magnificent
You.
film. It really inspired a lot of conversations in my house.
Oh, good.
And I hope everybody watches it. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout Emmy season. Lana Wilson, a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.